Tony, have you been enjoying the Mega Tangerines?
The Omega Tangerines.
Yes, the Mega Tangerines, where we get in order to catch up on my massive backlog of games we've been playing and we haven't been recording, we've been doing Mega Tangerines that hopefully are not too long to digest. But if you feel they are, I would suggest you just skip through the timestamps to find stuff you're
Yeah, go to the
interested in.
next. Yeah, well, this is a complete tangerine. I can't have
Yeah.
on topic,
Well, we're
but
tangerining, yeah.
yeah. What I like to do on longer videos, like if it has like good chapters, it's like oh, I don't care about this chapter, episode. Immediately skip to the next one. It's like oh, yeah, this is what I want. This is what I care
I'm
about. It
gonna
makes a lot,
I'm
lot of
gonna I'm
difference.
gonna make a mega tangerine tomorrow. I'm gonna make a big smoothie. I've got a bunch of fruit in the fridge, and I'm just gonna shove it all together in the blender and see what happens.
The
I've got
biggest
like,
tangerine you've
well,
ever seen.
I think I'm gonna put in like bananas, blueberries, raspberries. I'm
Yeah.
gonna add some melon, and then what's the other thing? Oh, I might try putting like cranberry juice in there. See what happens.
No, no oranges.
Well, maybe a couple of tangerines will
I
find their way into it.
I will say I've never seen a smoothie that adds like tangerines oranges.
She's been radicalized. That's
Okay, it was the red T-shirt.
Yeah. Tangerine. This is
Sleeping
Tangerine.
dogs.
Tangerine the Wheel One. If you've not been keeping
Okay.
up with the podcast or Tangerine, I've talked about the concept of the friend wheel, where I started putting all of my games into a wheel and start spinning it to randomly select me a game to play. I then had this idea of making a wheel where every single game that was selected was picked by a friend of mine. So when I spanned the wheel, it was high stakes because everybody who wanted to watch would go, "Oh, I want the wheel to, spin and land on my game." I then realised, well, if everybody gets to win, then nobody wins. So on the wheel, there is one wild card, which is a completely random game selected from my Steam library. Um, so yeah, and the first
I,
one
I
was
I still
picked.
consider it a win if you get it, but that's
Yeah,
just me.
the first one that was picked is called Sleeping Dogs. That is a game suggested by my friend Wrestling Matt, who's been on the podcast before, and it is a open world game set in Hong Kong about a
Yeah,
undercover police officer infiltrating a criminal gang. And this game has been okay. So I'll just straight up say, like I've said previously on Tangerines, I played a lot of open world games. Um,
yeah.
Earlier this year
You
or
got
last
burnt
year or
out on
something.
them.
I felt like I almost started to feel like I didn't like open world games based on um,
Yeah,
playing them.
you're playing bad open world games, and
I
like you're like,
well,
yeah, these
well,
things.
I heard stuff like people seem to love Mad Max and people seem to love the Pirates Assassin's Creed game, and I just hated them. Um,
Uh, I've heard mixed things with the Mad Max, and I didn't like it for the
but
Pirates
I'll just
Assassin's
go out
Creed
and
4.
say it
So
straight away. I came with low expectations of Sleeping Dogs just based on my previous aversion to open world games recently. I started playing Sleeping Dogs. I fucking love this game. It is so
yeah,
good. It is
it
really, really
is.
good. This is the
It's a
so
rare game I've played.
Some of the things I got to point out. This is the original Sleeping Dogs. I don't own the definitive edition of Sleeping Dogs, which is the thing that changed because I don't know if it fixed some of the bugs that the original Sleeping Dog has. Because one of the things that was annoying me was I couldn't get the game to full screen a lot of the time. It was really hard to get the game to stay in full
Okay.
screen.
I would say I have the definitive edition, and my version when you tab out and tab back in, it will like unfiltering.
The game doesn't run particularly well, even on very powerful
No.
hardware like I have. Um,
Hand optimization problems. Oh, it has also menu controls with mouse is like not great either.
Yeah, I found myself, I was doing like the GTA method that I've developed, and I'm sure lots of other people use, which is um, playing on foot with mouse and keyboard and then switching to a controller when I get inside a vehicle, which is
Okay.
something that I'm quite happy to do because I've got
Well,
wireless
you just put the
controller
controller
there.
like
Yeah,
you just put the controller in front of the keyboard.
I always have a controller on my
Okay.
desk, like right next to my keyboard, sort of thing. So
Okay.
I have like a wireless one, so it doesn't really matter where it is, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
I've got the Xbox Elite Series 2, which I'm
I've
very happy with. It is
I've
the
never done
best
that. So
controller I've ever used.
I drove all these vehicles with mouse and keyboard.
Yeah, I've tried drawing them with the mouse and it's fine, but it's just like
Not recommended at all.
no, I think it is. It is like a fine experience because like the drifting in Sleeping Dogs is really interesting. The cars are a lot more drifty in Sleeping Dogs compared to something like GTA.
Yeah,
They're a lot more drift dependent. I would say, like
they made it more stylized, like
yeah,
the actual
yeah.
handling.
I think like the gold standard for car handling still is GTA 5 is still the best
Oh yeah,
car handling I've played in
yep.
like one of these open world games. Like it's infinitely better than Mad Max. Whether that was an intentional design to have the car be kind of shit until you upgraded it. Even when I upgraded it, it wasn't. The mechanics weren't as good as something like a
Well, it
GTA.
was post-apocalyptic. You have to understand. Oh, you're driving
I
on the wrong side of the
I
road. It's left-hand drive.
No, in Hong Kong they drive on the. So I got really confused because for years I've been
Yeah,
playing GTA and all
yeah.
of these like Driver San
American game.
Francisco,
Yeah,
Burnout, whatever, but Paradise City. All of these games are like they're American. So
yeah.
in my brain, I go, okay, I need to drive on the right side of the road, and it's so confusing to me in a video game when I suddenly start driving on the left side of the road, the side of the road you drive in the real life in the UK.
Yeah, the correct one. Yeah.
Well, the correct one's a subjective term. Oh, as you can see here,
Well,
one of the content things here to this game is I'm wearing Rico's outfit from Just Cause, another Square Enix property.
yeah.
This is a Square Enix published game, which is a shame because it's also, I think, Just Cause and Sleeping Dogs both were not sold in the Embrace acquisition, so they're still in the dying, rotting NFT company known as Square Enix.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh yeah, wait. We're talking about the left-hand drive thing. Yeah. So because the roads were built out while the UK was like had ownership over the island,
yeah,
so like they built it to the UK standards. There's like UK signs with Chinese names on.
yeah.
It's crazy.
So one of the things I want to put, I might probably not mute this because in the cars you have
Oh, it's radio stuff.
copyrighted music. Oh,
Yeah.
one of the things I wanted to mention, I love the soundtrack for this game. It is so sick.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
it's like a mixture of like weird Hong Kong like Chinese style songs I've never heard, and then
Yeah.
like really sick like electronic instrumental stuff. Like there's an artist on the radio in here called Lorne, and I listened to his song Soft Play, and I've been listening to so much Lorne as a result of playing Sleeping Dogs because his stuff is really cool and I'd never heard it before. And I listened to it on the radio, Sleeping Dogs, and I'm like, this is sick. Why have I never heard this stuff before? It is really, really
Yeah.
cool.
Okay, that's cool.
So highly recommend bumping the radio on in Sleeping Dogs. Some really because it is like this weird mix of like just random music, like Hong Kong style like music and advertisements, and then you even get like a channel where it's very English sounding. Like it's very strange because if you don't know, Hong Kong was rented to England for many years by China, and like
Yeah,
Hong Kong is this
it was
weird.
leased to us for 99 years
It's
from like
Hong Kong is this
Victorian
weird
age.
blend of Chinese and English culture, which is like,
Yeah.
as somebody who's lived in the UK all my life, it's like very interesting to see. And then also, um, one of my good friends is currently living in Hong Kong and is part Hong Konger. I believe Hong Konger is the actual technical term for someone from Hong Kong,
Yeah. Yeah, his
because
ethnicity is, yeah.
people used to identify as Chinese from Hong Kong, but that's become more of a political issue now, and it seems lots of kids don't want to identify that way anymore. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Should we mention the environmental effects you just used?
yeah. So the combat
That's
in this
pretty
game is
critical.
really fucking cool. It is this really awesome mix of like martial arts and using the environment to like take down enemies very quickly, and it is awesome. Like it's not just a lot of these open world games. As soon as Arkham did the or Assassin's Creed or whatever, they did the, you
Yeah.
punch people combo and then you block people to stop them from attacking you. It seems like every single combat system became just like a plain copy of this. But the thing about Sleeping Dogs is they took it in a way that was really interesting, where they added these really, really awesome looking and feeling environmental kills. And then they also added all of these different, like, actual martial arts, like karate and taekwondo, that sort of stuff moves, right? That
Yeah,
are really cool
I
to
was gonna
perform and use.
I was gonna say, like, having, like, the environmental stuff, like, having, like, really thinking about your positioning, like, it just makes the combat feel more impactful than, like, in something like Arkham, which is I like, but it is, yeah, very overdone
I
at this
like that
point.
this game is very cool and can be very serious, but it never takes itself too seriously. Like, at one point, you just go to a karaoke bar and you start singing karaoke. Like,
Oh,
I've never played
yeah.
Yakuza, and Yakuza is a game I want to play at some point. I may be doing a Japan wheel at some point because I've realized I have a lot of Japanese games I want to try, but I've never really got into Japanese gaming.
You're
Um,
anti-Japan.
I'm not anti-Japan.
Oh, okay.
I'm just anti-anime bullshit. That's what I
Oh,
would say.
okay.
I like the ramming mechanics in this game. Reminds me very. It's
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
burnouty as well.
Well,
I'm the fan of
makes no
that sort of
sense, but
stuff.
it's hilarious.
But anyway, I was saying, I imagine this is what a Hong Kong version of Yakuza would be like, where you just run around a city, doing gangster stuff, but also you go like a karaoke bar and you go drinking and do dumb shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Which was like pretty cool. But anyway, what I was saying was, I was streaming this to a friend who lives in Hong Kong, and he was loving me playing this as well because he was reading all the signs and telling me like, oh, this sign says like it sells like robots here, or this person just said go fuck your mother, you motherfucker, or something like in Cantonese. And I was like, that's
Yeah.
such like a cool details that they've clearly crafted this really cool like video game version of Hong Kong, where he's
There's
like,
definitely a
"Oh,
love of Hong
that
Kong here.
that street you're going to, that looks like somewhere was like a couple of weeks ago. Like that's like really accurate to what it would be like being in Hong
Yeah.
Kong, sort of thing." And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." Um, but yeah, I genuinely really love this game, and I wasn't expecting that going into Sleeping Dogs because I think I initially started to play Sleeping Dogs very briefly, like years ago, and I thought there was some cool stuff, but I bounced off it just for various reasons. Like, there was a period in my gaming life early on where I would just start playing a game and then I would just randomly move on to another game, and it wasn't for any reason in particular. I just found it hard to stick to one game, sort of thing. I just bounced from game
Right,
to
right.
game, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I went back and played this because really glad for the recommendation from my friend Matt. I'm glad he recommended me to play this because I don't know if this was a game I would have gone back and played myself based on um, my versioned open world games recently. And I think that is kind of my goal of the wheel, was the fact that people could take games that they've really loved or they think I would love, and they could go, well, maybe this is a game you wouldn't pick for yourself, but because I've played this and I've really enjoyed this, maybe you should try and see if you like it. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate all of my friends who've participated in this, and shout out to my friend Matt because he recommended this game and I love it. It is fantastic. Really, really, really cool game. I love just driving around Hong Kong, listen to the radio, karaoke. The missions are
Yeah.
cool. Like you.
I
Oh, so
recommend.
that's an interesting thing. So you have a triad score and you have a cop score, and doing like triad mission stuff, like killing people and taking people down and doing stuff like that. That will get up your triad score, which then levels up like the skill tree for the triad. But if you do stuff like randomly kill pedestrians or do property damage, you won't get as much cop score, and then cop score is needed to level up your cop skills. So for cop skills, you can gain the ability to get like guns from the back of police cars or stuff like that. That's another thing that was interesting about this game is it makes sense that a lot of the time you don't use guns too often in this game, and
No, guns are legal.
yeah, the guns aren't a big thing in Hong Kong, or at least they're hard to import into
Where's
Hong Kong, I believe.
It's like the
Um,
UK where it's like you can get a gun, but it's like most people like there are very few guns compared to someone like America. I mean, I
but
think they even say like one of the characters even says that.
yeah, but it is interesting to see like this choice to have a lot of the characters fight in like these martial arts battles, and it makes sense in the story. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't juxtapose you out of the story or create ludonarrative dissonance. Where you're like, oh well, these guys would just pull out gun. If this was America, someone would just pull out a gun and stop the fist fight. But
yeah.
like, obviously, it makes a lot more sense in this game, which I really really like. Um, yeah, I really like the story of this game. It wasn't like I just played a lot of story missions. I got quite high levels on my stuff, and I think, most of the racing missions. A lot of the racing missions were pretty cool. The racing missions were weird though because it seemed like there was no rubber banding mechanic. So if you ever got ahead of the races in any of the races, they could never catch up to you, and it was just like, oh,
Yeah,
okay. Which
you
I
just
guess
win.
some people don't like rubber banding, but I think sometimes it can make things more interesting. Like there's egregious examples of rubber banding. Like I think, okay, it's a silly game, but for example, the rubber banding in Mario Kart, where when you're in last place, you get like the really overpowered power ups to make it so you have a
Yeah,
chance to come back, which, yeah, I think's fine, right? Um,
for Mario Kart, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But like when you're like clearly winning and another car shouldn't be able to catch up, then that is like something obviously you don't always want to happen. Um, Yeah, so I 100% recommend Sleeping Dogs to anyone. Really, really cool game. And I also played the one DLC I had, which was
Demons.
Nightmare in North Point. So
Yeah,
essentially, I think there's two DLCs for the Sleeping Dogs that are not just like, weapon packs or car packs.
or costumes.
Yeah, that essentially add story stuff to the game, and they're both fairly short. I think it took me maybe like an hour or so to complete the the DLC. It's essentially the same map, but then they add this ghost mechanic where sort of it's sort of more linear, but it's also you have these side objectives that you can go and do still in the open world. But I just love how funny it is where you can't attack this guy because you haven't drank the right magical tea potion, and then there's a guy in a shop you have to go to mix up the potion, and you have to go get the ingredients for it, and he's like, you have to get like pepper and you have to get like green tea, and then he's like, oh, now you need Windex. All ancient Chinese traditions have Windex in them and stuff like that. And like, yeah, that's uh, a good joke sort of thing. Like, um,
Yeah, it's not serious DLC then. Well, it's not serious story.
yeah, it doesn't, like, this DLC doesn't add anything to the main game, but it's its own like separate little short little, it's essentially like a couple of mission pack that adds a little bit um, more to like the universe and your interaction with the character. You meet a character called Ping in the main game, and then she tells you her name's not Ping, so you put her in the phone as not Ping, and then she never actually tells you her name. So throughout the entire game, her name is not Ping, and then this DLC sees the return of not Ping. You're going on a date with not Ping, who is still called not Ping because you don't know her actual name.
Zombies. What
Yeah,
are they
really cool.
jumping?
I think they intentionally have like this really like bad like design sort of thing where it's like
Yeah,
meant to look like
that's
those
hilarious.
early like old school movies sort of thing, which I really appreciate.
I guess it slows them down
Mm.
in a funny way.
Gonna send these fellas back to the Shadow Realm.
Where they belong.
I think the other one was called like Year of the Snake. Uh, apparently these are called the Jing
Chi
Angshi
Jinx or something?
Jiangxi or something, where they're
Yeah.
essentially the Chinese equivalent of vampires. And then there's
Right.
the Yao Guai, which is the Chinese term for demons, which is the big guy I couldn't fight yet because I hadn't unlocked the ability to go into my Super Saiyan spirit fighting mode.
He's some shit.
He's got a sale on demon fighting magic that I need to talk to this guy. Yeah. Sleeping Dog's really cool, and this DLC, if you have the definitive edition, you already own this DLC. So I think you can
Yeah.
only buy the definitive edition now.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Because one of the things that surprised me, because this is one last gripe before I go on, was that there was no way to change the key bindings in Sleeping Dogs, and it came out around like 2011, 2012, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Um, and one of the things was it's the like gun shooting aiming. It came out in 2012. The gun shooting aiming is set up like it was in Warhammer um, Space Marine, which is also around the time like 2011, 2012, whatever, where we have the modding aiming conventions of aiming down sights with like right click now, but
Yeah.
back then it was like control was the button to aim, and
What? Okay.
um, jump is your sprint key rather than shift. And there was no way to change this, which I would have liked the ability to change this. Whether you can rebind this in the definitive edition, I have no idea. I hope so. But I haven't played the definitive edition. I've only played the original edition, so I
I
have no idea if they allowed you to change this, which would have been nice for me playing on modern control
yeah.
edits.
I wonder if you can change the INI files to do like manually do it
Oh,
maybe.
there's
I don't
like
know.
auto hotkey stuff you could set up, but I mean
Yeah.
like easily natively in the game sort of
It
thing.
should be in the game, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But you recommend it?
I
Good.
recommend it, and yeah, I'm so glad that my friend recommended it. And we'll move on to the next Tangerine game, which was recommended from my friend who I was mentioning earlier from Hong Kong, which is my friend Calvin, and he recommended me to play Metro Exodus. So this is Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. So two games that have some sort of enhanced, definitive sort of edition of the actual game itself.
Yeah.
Um, this is so Metro Exodus was released in 2019. When it came out, it was critically acclaimed for being like a really high tech, like
Yeah, it
but
was
beautiful
like a
looking
wall attack in it, right?
game sort of thing. Yeah, and then the crazy guys over at 4A Games, because they use their own engine, right? They use the 4A engine, which I'm like, oh, that's cool that they use their own engine to make this stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, they were like, well, they probably got bored during COVID because in 2021 they re-released Metro Exodus as a enhanced edition with like uh, ray traced. The ray traced ambient occlusion, or is it global illumination they use?
I think it has both.
Right.
I think that's why
Um,
it's like so intensive.
this is me playing with. Yeah, it makes my computer sound like a turbo, and this is me
Yeah,
playing
like
with ray
it's the only
tracing
one that
on.
has like all three like ray tracings. Like it has like it's like missing up
No,
one type of ray.
I
I
don't.
can't
I
remember
don't
what
think
it
it
is.
doesn't have ray trace shadows.
No,
Uh,
it doesn't have shadow. I think that's what it's missing. There's something else that has as well. That's like, oh, they put that in as well. That's crazy. I can't remember what that is now.
But this edition of the game, like if you have the enhanced edition, it requires a ray tracing compatible GPU as part of the minimum spec. Because I think I had another friend who installed this after I started playing it. And he was like, "Oh, I'm going to play the enhanced edition." And I was like, "Oh, I don't think you can run that because you don't. You have like a 1660 or something. You don't have the ability to run ray tracing, so you have to install the old 2019 unenhanced edition sort of thing, which I think is confusing to people, sort of thing. Like they have it on the store
Yeah.
page, but it is still like kind of confusing to people. I'll look it up now. What ray tracing does Metro Exodus use? I think it's just they just use one. I think it's
Was it just the
just ray trace
emissive
global
stuff? Okay.
illumination. I don't think they
Yeah.
have like the ambient occlusion or the shadows, because that
Well,
would
the
make it
one
really, really like
well on the
intensive.
Nvidia website, they say like all shadows, lights in the game now contribute to ray trace global illumination.
Yeah, so
So
they're all under ray trace
they're
global
under that
illumination,
package,
but
yeah.
they're not under. There's not shadows or ambient occlusion.
No, I think that's yeah.
Anyway, but it's visually it's still very visually impressive, even if it doesn't have the full package sort of thing. It still looks like a fantastic game. It's making my computer sound a traction engine because I was playing on 1440p 120 FPS with
Yeah.
ray traced global illumination on. Um, but I had DLSS on performance. And another thing that I'll just mention about technicalities was I did, because some people have said there's ghosting on some of the guns when you run with the DLSS, and I did notice that myself.
Oh right.
Some ghosting on like the end of the guns, and I did even use the DLSS picker to change it to a more updated version of DLSS, and I didn't find that that fixed the ghosting issue for me. So that is something
Okay.
to consider, but it really wasn't game changing. It was just a really tiny you know, issue sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Just a small technical issue, not game
That's
breaking, I
only
suppose.
that's only. I said I had an aversion to open world games recently, and I just played two open world games in a row. So the way
They
Metro
are very
works,
different.
yeah. So the way Metro works is it's essentially a linear level based game, but every level is set up as a sort of a big open world map where you can
Yeah.
go wherever you want to, sort of thing. So the game is set up linearly, but the levels are non-linear, which is kind of an interesting
Yeah.
way to do that more of an open world experience sort of thing. Because I, as a person, I love linear first-person shooter games. That's like my shit. I love
With like
just
really cool set pieces and like
yeah,
they've really
yeah.
thought about how it works. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So immediately, I will say clearly the presentation is a big part of Metro Exodus. The game looks
Yeah.
really good, and it's its biggest strength and one of its biggest weaknesses, I would say, in the terms of a lot of the time the game has a lot of cutscenes and it will take control away from the player a lot of the time. And I think it gets to a point where it's a detriment a lot of the time where you can get to points in the game where you're literally just sitting there for like what feels like 10-15 minutes just watching the character do stuff, and it's like I believe it's Alex Battaglia from Digital Foundry said if you're if you're going to make the character do something cool, don't show somebody else doing it or the character do it. Let them play it.
Yeah.
That's
Let
when
them be the character.
let yeah, because I understand like they want it to be more immersive. In the same way as Half Life, you don't have a voiced character, so you're more immersed into the character. Artyom, the main character of Metro Exodus, is not a voiced character.
Right.
Um, But the amount of forced cutscene and characters talking directly to your character, it's so strange that your character isn't voiced because they didn't go. Characters are constantly trying to talk to you on the radio, and it's like he can't talk to you. He can't talk. I think the only time your character is voiced is he does voiceovers in the loading screens in like a diary format. But other than that, he
Right.
never speaks.
Right. Well, can we get the enhanced edition that has main character voice lines?
I think it was done purposely to add to the immersion. And I think immersion is a big thing about Metro.
But
Um,
why? I don't know. I to me, like not having a voiced character is
because every other
unimmersive.
character in the game is voiced. 100%. So
I don't have a problem playing as someone else. That's the thing.
yeah, and I'll get into that later when I talk about the DLC. Because the
Okay,
DLC
okay,
features a voiced main protagonist character that you get to play as, and I think
okay,
it's a much
okay. I'll
better
wait till then.
experience. Um,
Okay, okay.
Something I should point out: Metro Exodus is actually, I believe, the third game in a series of games, and I've never played a Metro game. So I started right on the third game, um, just because I think it was the best place, like modern and graphically, to jump in.
Yeah.
As a like going back and playing the older games may not be as good, sort of thing. Like in terms of they may be outdated. I've heard people still really rate the old Metro games and say they're good, and
Well,
I
there were
could have.
always technical powerhouses, so
Yeah, I think I definitely could have gone back and played the Metro games first before playing this, but this was the game my friend chose in the wheel. Like I may have
Right.
chose to play the earlier Metro games first, rather than playing the later ones. I think I don't
So it's like
own.
I said,
I don't think I own some of the earlier Metro games. Actually, I think
oh, do you not?
no.
Okay.
I think I own them on different launchers. I think I own like one of the Metro games on a different launcher, but Exodus was one I owned on Steam, so it was an easy pick for people who were looking through my games library to pick games for me. Um, but yeah, apparently, I guess spoiler alert if you haven't played the first two. I have a wife. This is my wife I'm talking to. That was something I was like, oh, I guess I have a wife. But like throughout the entire story, sure, I could have had more context from the early games, but I never felt like I was missing out from not playing the previous games. I think if
Yeah.
you're interested in the Metro games, this is a good point to jump in, sort of thing. Like
So for the
maybe
story in this game, you didn't need any of the extra information from the previous
some
games.
like points are going to be like more impactful for you if you've like played these characters over several games. I will say,
Hmm.
but obviously, as someone who's never played a Metro game and just like immediately jumped in at this point, I didn't feel like I was missing too much from not playing the previous games. And it's hard to say because I'm not somebody who has played the previous games, but from the perspective of someone who hasn't played them, I can tell you I didn't feel like I was missing out too much, which is nice to see. And I think
I like
overall, oh
the
god,
line only Metro. So just he just said it's only Metro.
yeah. So I guess I should go into sort of the story of Metro. So it's a series of books actually,
Yes.
written very famously. As soon as you launch the game, it goes. It's like one of the best-selling book series of all time, the Metro series. And it's essentially the idea is there was a massive war all over the world, the war to end all wars, and the game does a pretty good job of explaining some of this to you, sort of thing. So you're not too confused if you just jump in here.
Yeah.
Um, and that essentially started this big nuclear World War III that basically ended society, and everyone went into hiding in like the metro stations, sort of similar to like again like Fallout, where everyone went into these like bunkers, sort of thing. And when they came out, they realized that a lot of the outside world turned into these like irradiated monsters, sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
then you're very cut off from the world, and people have like built their entire homes inside these metro stations now, which is really interesting.
It's an
Like
interesting aesthetic.
I guess I guess playing this game could kind of spoil the previous two games in a way because I don't know, because very early on in this game
Um.
you learn something that kind of completely changes your
Oh.
worldview of Metro.
I think that was always like hinted at. But I guess it's not quite. Yeah.
Because
Maybe.
I don't know if you want me to go into this, but it is very early on in this game, and I don't know if you're really going to go
I
back and
think
play
you might
the
as
early.
well. To be honest,
Yeah,
I
so
don't think it's a huge revelation.
sort of like previous Metro game spoiler alert, but the idea is that very early on in this game, Artyom is one of the few people who wants to venture out of the metro, and that's what you do in the earlier games. But basically, very early on in this game, you realize that the people in the metros have been blocking the radio communications with the rest of the world, and the rest of the world still exists. Whereas at this point, you believed that Russia was the
The
only
only
place
survivors.
in the world that still survived.
Yeah.
And then you sort of start going on a train journey across Russia to try and contact the Russian government and figure out like how to like rebuild civilization, sort of thing. So you go with your wife, Anna. You have like this ragtag group of Russian characters. You have like there's a guy called Idiot, and I thought, oh, they're calling him an idiot because like he's an idiot, but he's literally in the subtitles. His name is Idiot. I don't know if he appears in the previous games, but there's a character just called Idiot. There's a character called Duke. I would say one of the more memorable characters, the character Sam, who's an American who was in an embassy in the Russian embassy when the bombs hit, and he's had to like live with these Russian people this whole time, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, which I say was one of the more because one of my big complaints with the characters was, um, especially from not playing the previous games, all of the characters are kind of the same to me. It was getting to a point where there would be missions where I would play and fight against a bunch of human enemies, right? And my team would come in and help me and shoot the enemies with me. And I couldn't tell the difference between the enemies and my teammates. And it was a big problem.
Are you sure it's not down to racism?
No, like literally the
You use like the
all of the humans in
yeah similar
this
armor
game,
and
like
color palette.
there's no like clear outlines for like different factions and stuff. Like they haven't like chosen like
In
solid colors for like specific factions and stuff like
I
that.
think
Like that's one
in
of
a
my
way that's
complaints
kind
with
of
the
the
game.
point though,
Hmm.
because like, you're not going to know like
It's
if like what's
like
going on.
it's this realism versus fun slash
Yeah,
readability.
yeah,
Like yeah, this stuff makes the game feel more immersive, and it is really cool when you put on your gas mask and you're checking your oxygen levels and get really immersed, and then suddenly like a mutant comes out and no one attacks you and it scares the hell out of you. That stuff's really really cool, but it's also really annoying when I constantly have to change my gas mask filter and wipe my gas mask. And I have to pump this gun up to fire it, and I have to constantly be unjamming my guns. And you know, I think there's a good balance between realism and making the game fun to play. And I think
yeah,
Metro does a good job, better than some other realistic games I've played. Like I think Green Hell is probably one of the worst games for this. That I think goes too far into the realism at the sake of gameplay, um, or fun sort of thing. Where I think like a game
yeah,
like The Forest is a lot more fun in that way. Um, like generally, I Metro is a game I've always been interested in trying, but I don't think it was a game I would have picked out for myself necessarily because it's not my style of game. Like I'm very much like arcade, fast-paced linear shooters, and more so like boomer shooters. I love games like
yeah.
Doom, um, stuff like that. Whereas this is closer to a game like Escape from Tarkov or something like that. For example, incredibly realistic gunplay and atmosphere. There's no like HUD or UI. I don't know if you've noticed that, but there's no HUD on the screen, and it's much more about trying to get you to believe you are Artyom, you are in the nuclear apocalypse, and you are just trying to survive. And it does that very well. And the game itself is very fun, but sometimes it comes at the cost of, um, you know, the ability to have fun and not get annoyed by these small annoyances. And another thing I noticed while playing is I wasn't sure at the time, but Metro has like a small moral system in the game, which I was like is actually really cool. And I wasn't sure how in depth it was until I finished the game. So the way you find out about this is throughout the game you'll sort of make small decisions. It's never explained to you in the morale system or even told it's in the game. I guess that's maybe intentional to be like, well, how would you
Yeah,
react in these situations? And then it gives
yeah.
you sort of your
You're not trying to metagame the
because
system.
Metro has two endings, and the ending changes based on your moral actions at the end. I didn't know this going into it, and essentially, the way it's gamified is some of the levels you have to stealth in order to unlock the good ending, in quotation marks.
Right.
Um, but the stealth system in Metro is not the greatest. I got to be honest with you. I tried using the stealth system in Metro, but like enemies will see you through doors and they will see you through like random barriers, and like I've had mutants just attack me through doors and stuff like that, and I've had circumstances sometimes
Okay.
when I've like stealth killed a guy which like teleported me behind him, and when it teleported me behind him, he teleported me into a wall and I got stuck and I had to reload the checkpoint sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
there is some like small bugs, and it's a shame because it does sort of put a dampener on the stealth system, which is a big part of the morale system. Um, but I do think the morale system is really really cool overall. Something I really quickly noticed, without this being explained to me, was um, when you fight a bunch of enemies and you kill enough of them, your enemies will start giving up. they'll start like raising your weapons and they'll be like, I surrender sort of thing, which I was like, oh,
Mm.
that's really fucking cool. I've never really seen that in another FPS game. And also, like when you see characters around the world, they'll go, "Oh, he's the heretic," but then they'll be like, "Well, he spared all those people. Maybe he's not so bad." Like there is these like small morale things that really
Yeah.
start to, and then there's like side quest content as well, where there's like a girl on the train and like a little girl, and she wants you to get a teddy bear, and it doesn't give you like any weapon upgrades or anything getting this teddy bear, but it does like impact the morale system. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I think that's a really cool way to do like an invisible morale system, which I think Metro does really well. I think it is a genuinely really cool system. I think the problem is when you realize how the system works, which is essentially there is entire levels where you're not supposed to kill characters. But these characters are trying to kill you the entire time. So the only way to get around them is by stealthing the entire level. And if you don't stealth the entire level and choose to stealth and not kill these characters that are actively trying to kill you, then you'll get a bad ending. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of a shame. Like, I don't like that they did
Yeah.
it that way, but I can see,
It's a little
like,
bit too hard of a.
yeah, again, it's like obviously it's more of an interesting choice where you're forced to make a harder decision because you're choosing not to kill people who are actively killing you. But from a gameplay standpoint, I'm like, well, the better decision would have been to make it so you don't force the player to play in a certain way that honestly is
Yeah.
not the optimal
It
way to play because of bugs and
it
how
should be more
finicky it
like
can be.
yeah, it should be more like how do you decide to approach mission, not just the playstyle.
Overall, I think I enjoyed Metro. It's not a game I think I would have picked myself, and it's not my style of game because it is more realistic shooter and it's more open world than I generally like. Um, and I think I appreciate the amount of effort that went into building this. It's a gorgeous looking game. It is very cinematic to a fault in the same way that Bioshock Infinite is cinematic to a fault, where so
Mm.
much control of the character is taken away a lot of the time. Um, because there's a bunch of levels, right? It has a lot less levels than previous Metro games, which I believe are more linear, to my
Yeah, I believe
knowledge.
that's correct. They're more linear.
Um, but it's set up and says because I looked up how many levels there were, and it was like there's this many levels, but a lot of the levels are just they're called like summer, and it will be the summer season. It'll be you walking around the train talking to characters, and there'll be no gameplay. So I wouldn't consider them actual levels. If you were to break
Okay.
down how many like these big open world levels there is about four of them, I would say, um, or like four or five of them, because one of them is the Moscow level, but that's essentially just the tutorial of the game. Um, and then there's the train levels, which I said are essentially just um, you know cutscenes. Essentially, they're not really levels.
Yeah.
So when you break it down, there's essentially just one, two, three, four, five levels in Metro sort of thing. But they're very big open levels with lots of side objectives. But that is something to consider. Like it's a lot short. Like it's a lot. There's not as many levels as there was in previous Metro games. I will say.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, their dog's been radicalized. Don't feel bad about kill. I keep talking about radicalized. There's so many games where you have to kill dogs in shooter games. And that's the end of Metro, guys. You just die. That's the final cutscene of
You
Metro.
chose the wrong option, I think.
But I did. So this is the Metro Enhanced Edition, so it comes with the DLC. So I did play the DLC, and the DLC both are story related, and the first DLC takes place on the final mission of Metro Exodus, and the second DLC, which I believe is the more well received one and my personal favorite one, to a point where I think I prefer it to the base game, is set like a long time after the events of the base game. So the Metro Exodus, the two kernels, without going into specific spoilers for the game, is set as like a prequel to the final mission. And if I was going to sum it up in one line, it would be Viscera slime detail, um,
Okay.
where essentially um, a large part of the game is just you get this new flamethrower weapon. You're like, oh, that's cool, but it's a super realistic flamethrower, and you constantly have to pump it up, and it runs out of fuel very quickly, and it's not very fun to use. But like, essentially, you're in this different metro station before like a civil war broke out of, which you get hints to in another mission, but it sort of goes into how it happened and that sort of stuff, which is it's cool, but it's essentially um, the main gameplay of it is like an hour of there's this radioactive goo that keeps coming into the station because of the way like the radioactiveness and the mutants work sort of things. They have to get these flamethrowers and blow back this goo. So it's essentially like an hour of setting on fire this goo, this radioactive goo, which reminded me of just playing Viscera Cleanup Detail or like Power Wash Simulator. I say Viscera Cleanup Detail because it's very much more like bloody,
Yeah.
realistic, and then also it is more annoying. And then
Yeah.
then the other hour is just essentially cutscenes. So I played this DLC and I wouldn't recommend it really, unless you're
Okay.
really into the story and you're like, oh, I have to watch this cutscene to find out what happened on that mission I played in Exodus. I don't really recommend the two kernels. I think it was you could honestly skip it. People who like the story obviously will really like this, and if you're more connected to the characters than I was, maybe you want to play this. But honestly, I don't think it was worth my time. It was a lot of just. It was almost like a video at some points.
Right,
The
right.
next DLC, which is the other DLC for Metro Exodus, was Sam's story. So if you remember, I alluded to Sam is the American character, and Sam, after the events of Metro Exodus, he goes off to try and find his dad, who's still in America. So he's essentially trying to find a trip um, in order to get home, which brings him basically to this giant like nuclear submarine that's owned by another American, the one other American in Russia, um, and it's essentially like he has to basically do missions for this guy to get this sub back on, and then there's moral choices along the way, sort of thing, and there's big moral choices at the end. Um, which I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. The thing I really liked about Sam's story, which I alluded to earlier, was you're a voiced protagonist, and the game makes so much more sense considering how much of it is characters talking to you and you
Yeah.
sitting there saying nothing. Rather than doing that, it's actually you talk back to the characters and have conversations with them. It makes the
Nice.
game so much more interesting for you from like a story point. Actually, it makes much more sense that the characters talk to each other.
And you actually feel
Um,
like the character because you've actually got a personality
yeah,
instead of just nothing.
but yeah, and I would say it's a bit more linear. It's very much.
Okay.
I feel like it was more linear than the base game, which
I
some
think
some
that's
people
great.
won't
'Cause the
like.
smaller maps, right?
I think the map size is around the same size as a normal
Oh, okay.
Metro map. It's
Just the way it's set up.
just the way it's set up is it's much more because instead of being like the levels are very open, but you're always going towards a objective in another level sort of thing. It's just set up on one level sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it has to keep constantly pushing you forward through the story through the level sort of thing. But there is like optional side content you can go and do. I preferred the humor of this one because there's a set like I complained about the cutscenes in this game, but at one point you meet a captain of the submarine, and it's essentially like a 10-minute montage of you getting insanely drunk with this captain, and you like find a boombox and start listening to music, and then in this montage you you start like fighting mutants and stuff like that, and you just like completely pass out and stuff like that. Um, One of the complaints I saw about this was there is like one of the major fights in the DLC is that you fight this like big Batwing enemy, and I know people didn't really like it that much. I thought it was
Right.
fun. There's like these forced Batwing fights. There is like force big monster fights in the base game, like you fight this giant bear, this like radioactive bear in the base game, but I think it was fine. I didn't really mind it that much. The Batwing fights. I mean, fighting the Batwing did noticeably tank the FPS sort of thing. Like,
Yeah.
um, there's a lot of like effects going on when you're fighting that. Some people complained about the performance of that, which I think is fair. But I really liked Sam's story. I think I may even prefer it to the base game. It was much more linear and focused. I wasn't felt like it was being, um, you know, watered down by like adding all of this side content. And I much preferred having a voiced character. I'm much more connected
Yeah.
with the American Marine trying to find his dad than this random mute Russian guy on a train going across Russia. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
I think that's
Maybe
a lot of people. I think a lot of people connected better with
Well, maybe if
the
you're from
voice.
Eastern Europe, you may connect better to the RTM character. I don't know, but
Well,
as
maybe, but I
I can,
still think it should
I
talk.
connected more to a Western character, which probably makes sense.
No, I've seen like other people say like it's just so much better to have someone talk, and like he just wished.
Because
Like I've
like
seen people like pretend to like put stuff in between, like in the silence in the base game.
no, because you can do like having an unvoiced character and make it immersive. Like
Yeah,
the greatest example of this is Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 never feels weird that you never talk in it because you are immersed in the character and it's built in a way where you're not supposed to be having full conversations with random characters, right? A lot
yeah,
of the game is
yeah,
a lot of that game is told through the gameplay. It's not told through cutscenes because if you can do something cool, let the player play it.
yeah,
But overall, my opinion of Metro Exodus is I like the game. It's just it looks great. It looks absolutely fantastic, but it's to its detriment sometimes when it's trying to be this immersive game and it takes away control of the character and it stops the character from actually having conversations and saying interesting things to people. So that's why I preferred Sam's Story DLC, and I would highly
yeah.
recommend playing the Sam Story DLC. And I don't recommend the Two Kernels DLC as much unless you're really into the story. So that's Tangerine. Two games I would
Good game.
recommend, and the first two games I spun on my wheel. The next Tangerine will be on Undertale and what other game I spin on my wheel. When we do the next wheel Tangerine, there will be other Tangerines in between. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.